stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting. And my book is available for pre-order until August 31st. Similar to a Kickstarter campaign, there are some great bonuses when you pre-order your copies. And when the campaign ends, the bonuses end too. Unlike a Kickstarter campaign, this book will be published no matter how many copies are pre-ordered. So why buy this book? Think about what it would be like to feel more like a hero in your life when you tell your stories, to take charge of those stories that impact your heart and your mind. Based on this podcast, the book is designed to help you uncover the pivot points and stories in your life, those moments that have created internal messages that continue to play a role in your struggles and successes. The book can be used for you to create your very own story portfolio, a list of stories, which can be a great way to self-reflect on patterns to understand where your happiness and satisfaction comes from, as well as how you might contribute to your obstacles, miscommunication, and friction in relationships at work and at home. Remember, this campaign ends on August 31st, and so do the great bonuses. I appreciate your support. Today's podcast features my dear friend and phenomenal craftsman, Al Swanson.
I'm so lucky today. I get to sit here with my friend Al Swanson right in his shop in Helena, Montana. And if you don't know who he is, you will want to at the end of this conversation. And you want to see a lot of his woodwork, particularly his fly boxes for fly fishing and other accessories that you can get related to that theme. So I asked Al to join me on my podcast today because we share some interesting conversations regularly, and I wanted to share some of those with our listeners. So we decided we would crack open a beer. Luckily, all the equipment is turned off.
I'm done for the day.
We don't have any saws moving. No sharp objects anywhere near us.
Everything is static, just the way we want it.
Just the way we want it. Mm-hmm. So we're going to crack open some beers and have a conversation. And just for our listeners, I will have links to Al's website and the blog post associated with this podcast, as well as some more information about his background. So let's crack open our beers, shall we?
Let's do it. It's stereo.
Of course. And just so that our listeners know, these are local beers made in Montana.
No Bud Light here in the studio.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear you say that.
So good.
So we have a Lewis and Clark. Actually, are they both Lewis and Clark?
They are.
They are.
Backcountry Scottish.
And the Halo Huckleberry.
Which I can smell from here. It smells fantastic.
It does. You know, I don't generally like fruit-flavored beer.
I like that one.
I like this one because you don't really taste the huckleberry until the finish.
It's nice and light and crisp and good on a muggy, which this is. Totally reminds me of a New England day.
It does. It feels like New England.
Clammy and muggy, and I love it. Love it.
In addition to our beer here and the smell of a huckleberry beer just opened, I can smell the fresh cut wood and the cedar shavings that we were talking about, and we'll talk a little bit more about those in a few minutes. But just to get started, I invited Al to talk about some things related to owning your awesome, because I think many of us struggle with that, mostly the balance between owning that and being arrogant. And the difference is that when you own your awesome within your area of expertise, but you understand and are curious about the things that are outside of your expertise, I think you open the door for deeper relationships.
Absolutely.
So why don't you share with our listeners something about yourself that most people don't know? They wouldn't see it on your bio or on your website. And just so that they have a better feel for who you are, just basic understanding.
And that's a very interesting question. I don't know that it's one I've been asked, at least in a long time. But I immediately have the answer because it still resonates in part with what I kind of do as a profession. And so growing up on a farm in Maine, I just had to fall in love with the outdoors. outdoors because we had the forest. And we had beautiful lawns and beautiful landscapes. And so as a kid, my first job was at a golf course. And I worked on really prestigious golf courses throughout high school and eventually decided, after a brief stint in college for business, et cetera, that I wanted to study turf grass management.
Turf grass management, that's a big business.
Agronomy. So I studied agronomy, turf grass, and soil sciences at Rutgers University. And I have probably the nicest lawn in town.
I bet you do.
So I take a lot of pride in that, which I take a lot of pride in everything that I do. Mm-hmm. But growing up around all of that and the smells of the outdoors and the smells of the grass, I just love to be outdoors. So working on golf course was just fabulous. It was a unique profession, one that, frankly, because of the back injury, I kind of had to change paths and way back. And yet there is a day that I don't miss doing that, because it's such an awesome, cool career. I mean, I got to know my boss at this golf course, who was this young dude who was so looked up to keep, this 150 acres of pristineness on the ocean environmentally protected and doing these really radical new ways of using eco-friendly fertilizers and non-pesticides and things that were the absolute unheard of, because back in the day when this course was built in 1895, it was just kill everything and use whatever it took to make it green and use whatever it took to kill the bugs and blah, blah, blah. Well, it was fascinating to work in that, and it was also really fascinating to then go to school for that, and that's what I intended to do. But here I am. And not many people know that.
I did not know that. That definitely caught me a little off guard, and I'm so glad for that. Thank you.
You bet.
That's a good story. Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, that actually is a really good compliment to a conversation I had with Rocky Cannell over at Park Avenue Bakery, who discovered the trick to making real French baguette at high altitude in Helena, Montana. And in that episode, we talked about how we put our energy into everything we do and how important it is to understand that, because whether we're talking to our kid or taking care of our fur babies or building something that somebody else is going to hold in their hands and value, we feel that energy in everything. So we live in a place where there are amazing artists, like ceramic artists in particular.
Indeed.
And so I love to hold bowls and cups that these artists made, because you can feel it. It's infused.
I always say that, having had an art gallery here in town years ago for quite a long time, I got to know a lot of these people, and they're just great people from all over the world who would come study there at Gibray, and et cetera, et cetera. And eventually over time would collect cups and mugs and bowls and things like that. And I always say that the coffee always tastes better in a handmade mug. Spaghetti is always more fabulous on a handmade plate. Mm. It just is, because it's not so much about food. It's the authenticity of how it's being held came from, that it was created by hand and was derived by somebody's idea. Mm-hmm. That's the authenticity of the depth of how far back that goes. So I think if you allow yourself to think that way, your food will taste better, your coffee will taste better out of handmade things.
I think that's a really important detail, that whatever you're infusing your energy into is better if you're paying attention to those details. So during Rocky's conversation, I talked about when I'm making bread, particularly the Jewish ceremonial Sabbath bread, which is braided, kalkala, and kneading my energy into it when I'm kneading the bread. So tell me about one of the projects that you recently worked on that you felt that you feel it on all of your projects, but has there been one recently that really felt like rock star?
Rock star in what way?
When you walk away from something and you think, that's it, I was born to do this, I'm in exactly the place that I need to be in this moment.
I think because you hit the nail on the head of that, I take such pride in everything that I make, and still I was taught very old school methods. And over time, you can find better equipment and computers and all kinds of things that can increase your productivity and make it safer, have an environment that's just cleaner and better. But the fundamentals will never, ever change. Unfortunately, that's what I see with a lot of people that do what I do and do other things too, is that they've also altered the fundamentals. Wood is wood. And it's going to do what it's going to do. It's going to move and cup and twist and warp. And these things that we create are going to move around the world. And you don't know what environment they're going to be in. So you really better pay attention how you're creating it now. And it's a simple philosophy that if it took 200 years for that walnut tree to grow, I have a responsibility to make a piece that lasts at least that long. And that goes into every piece. So a lot of the stuff I do is sometimes, especially like with the fly boxes, for example, and I'll mention a recent example just this week. They become semi-experimental. Like there are times when, everything that leaves, if my eyes say that's perfect, I pretty much know it is. I really have learned to trust my eyes and my sense of proportion and how things are put together. I just really trust them. Mm-hmm. And I have for years, and it's never disappointed people. But I recently was I was asked by a pretty major company to do some pretty major pieces, a couple boxes that were going to be gifts for employees that had worked there for 20 years. Wow. So this was going to be their parting gift with my fly box. And I'm talking with a woman at this pretty prestigious company in California, and frankly had to ask the question, like, how did you hear about me? And she chuckled and said, everybody knows about you. Oh. Don't you know that? And that was a very flattering, but also deep down, I knew that. Because I know what we put out. It may take a little while to get. We don't make them in major, major mass production because I won't. Mm-hmm. Every single piece that leaves is signed by me. It's touched by me. And it's approved, and that's why none come back. And all we get are emails and texts and phone calls of praise that it just totally made somebody's anniversary, had their best birthday ever, the best corporate gift ever. But I was messing around with these boxes, and I knew that these also were going to be a first impression on this company, and the people were going to touch them. And I spent quite a lot of time making the first two because I kind of redesigned existing ones, thinking I want them better. And I got done, and I just didn't love them. There was just something about them that I just didn't love. And I don't sleep. I won't. It really affects me personally if when I leave at the end of the day, I'm not really happy with what I've done. So I scrapped them and completely started over and did what my gut told me I should have first time. And then this was yesterday. Oh. And yesterday I finally finished the two that you just saw and thought, those are perfect. I think that old adage of nothing to add, nothing to take away. Exactly. I think they're just perfect. So that makes me very happy. So there's a lot of pride wrapped up in that. And then just the wait for when these people get them, what their response is going to be, etc. I have a hunch. And so that's good to know. It's good to really own your work and really put every little detail, every ounce of effort. You've only got a job to do, and it's do it right and do it once. Mm-hmm. And I see a lot of the contrary, and I just don't know how people do that.
So we talked a little bit about those particular details when I first walked into the shop. And one just totally struck me as particularly beautiful and thoughtful. And you said, and I'm sitting here next to one of these cedar shavings that you make. I'm smelling it now. And Al, tell me a little bit, just say it again, what you told me about these cedar shavings and how you use them.
So to me, a product is more about its provenance, its expression, and who made it and where it came from, and its environment. The product is what it is, but it has a story. It has a narrative. It has sweat on it. It's been touched by people, by me. And when you ship pieces like this to New Zealand, the UK, New Jersey, Wyoming, it doesn't matter, those people aren't in the shop. And so when every time somebody visits here, just like you are right now, and when everybody walks in, they say, oh, that smell. It smells like wood. Absolutely. So I take with a hand plane and I take some Spanish cedar and I'll cut a few shavings, put it inside the box so that when this is shipped and you open the box, you're in my studio for a brief second. You smell it. Because it's the senses that awaken everything in people. I'm not there to tell the story, but the piece will tell the story. It has the feel of glass, the finish like butter. You open up the actual fly box, and there is a little picture of me, the guy that made it, and a little story. And then there's the shaving, so you can pretend you're in my space, all but for a second. And I've never seen that done.
It's experiential is what it is. It's not just a gift that you gave somebody or that somebody was given. It's when they open that box and they smell those cedar shavings and have that sense of being there, even for a moment, that fly box suddenly takes on an experience, not just a thing.
That's right.
And we've been hearing a lot over the last few years about people choosing to consume experiences rather than stuff. And a fly box is kind of the perfect, demonstration of that, because it is stuff, but it's art. And when it's yours, it's experience. And then it's functional when you're out there experiencing the water, which we both do. We both wade into that water and cast a fly across a beautiful river. So it's almost like when somebody opens that box, they can see themselves doing that somewhere in Montana.
That is the idea. And the fact that I'm so blessed to live here, where so many people come, to fish, to vacation, to explore our wonderful outdoors. But I've also, with all of my boxes and fly rug cases and things like that, even my furniture, they all have a name. And the fly boxes are all named after iconic Montana rivers, the Blackfoot, the Yellowstone, the Missouri, the Madison, the Gallatin. These are rivers that some people out there have fished. And so when they see that, they automatically want that piece because it reminds them of when they were here with their father or their mother or whatever. The kid. Yeah. And so it automatically just transports them back to that river. Mm-hmm. But I've even been taking that a step further lately. And it's really, really, there's an authenticity that goes with all of this, because I'm such a believer in how do you take stuff and give it a life?
meaning.
Give it true meaning and a really, really authentic meaning. So I think if I was doing this in Chicago, it wouldn't have the panache. So I'm using the panache that we have. I'm going to leverage it every single way I can because it's genuine. And I live the lifestyle. I use it. I get out and do it. And so just this last weekend, the weekend before, I wanted to go fishing on the Blackfoot because we can.
I know. I was there a few weeks ago too.
Because we can.
Different part of the Blackfoot.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a long river.
And I have my personal Blackfoot fly box that I made for myself, loaded full of flies, and I'm on that river, and something dawned on me because you have to take pictures of these things, right? And generally they're put in a little light box or they're whatever. I mean, they're just kind of stoically photographed. And it just kind of hit me. I looked at where I'm standing. Like, people pay big money to come here for one, but for two, look at this beauty. And that's what this box is named after, is this river that I'm up to my knees in. I found some rocks, I found a log, I set it up, and I photographed it. And it's probably, to me, some of the coolest photographs I've ever had of these products. How authentic can you get when it's on site, on its namesake? I think that's really going that extra mile, and I really think people will resonate with that. And so now I'm just going to start doing that. And did that with these two boxes that I'm sending out today. One's the Yellowstone and one's the Blackfoot. So I photographed the Yellowstone on the Yellowstone, and I photographed the Blackfoot on the Blackfoot. And those go along with the piece. So people can see that and experience that narrative, smell the shop, and then I think it's not just a gift anymore.
No, it's an experience.
Yeah, and it's one that in this world today, people are starting to covet more and more and more, and I frankly always have. And on the marketing side of things, I always knew that it's not the steak, it's the sizzle.
Right.
And that's what this is all about.
This brings us really easily into the whole theme of this podcast, even though we've been talking about details and putting your energy into something. One of the reasons I wanted to chat with you was because of a story you told me about owning that awesome, owning that meaning, and not taking it for granted, honoring it for what it is. And you told me a story about taking a road trip. You were out fishing, and then you ended up at the Phillipsburg brewery.
That's right.
And can you just tell me that story again so our listeners have the benefit of hearing it?
Well, it was just such a unique and off the cuff. I'm very whimsical and have, really started to get out and explore my Montana a lot more. And I had never been to Phillipsburg, crazy enough. And I thought, I'm just going to go. I have no idea what I'm going to see. I have no idea what I'm going to find. I'm by myself, and I'm really great in my own skin. But I usually meet up with people and start a conversation. And so I sat there. It had rained. Then I have my beer, and I'm out on the porch, and I'm by myself looking at this beautiful valley. And just kind of in my own little heaven. And I noticed these 4 people wanted to come. They came up, and they ordered a beer and asked if they could join me. I said, absolutely. Just
for our listeners, a lot of our breweries and tap rooms have big community-style, family-style tables. So if somebody's sitting at one, it's not unusual for strangers to come up and sit with you.
And this was even more important because I had the only dry spot, and it rained. So it really was kind of...
They didn't really
have much of a choice. Yeah.
Or not. I mean, that was their choice.
And so they sat down with me, and they were from the Seattle area, Puget Sound area, and telling me a little bit about themselves and what they were doing there. And I'm just listening, and I think you can always learn the most when you listen rather than talking. Talkers don't learn, listeners learn more. So I just listened and was kind of fascinated by these people. And eventually one of the gentlemen said, so what's your name? What do you do? I said, I introduced myself. And before I even said what I did, he had this bewildered look on his face.
When he heard your name.
When he heard my name. And I thought, I didn't really, I'm not really thinking outside of this moment.
Right.
And then he said, are you the guy that makes that fishing gear? And I said, yeah.
So part of the story when you told me was that he kept looking at his wife and then looking at you and looking at his wife.
So when I said, I'm the one, then he's kind of hitting his wife and getting her attention. And then they're having a conversation and then she's like, oh, that is him. I've talked to you on the phone. Oh my gosh. She had bought her husband presents over the course of years that I had made. And they recognized the name. She recognized my face from being in catalogs and et cetera, et cetera. And now the whole conversation flipped. They wanted to know everything about me. I was there. And I literally felt almost like a celebrity of sorts, even though I don't particularly see myself in that role.
Right.
But you know what? I owned it. Because they were full of compliments and they were full of wonder about how I do all these things and how many employees and how do you, and I love to talk about it. I love to tell the story because it's quite simple and it all stemmed from a good deed. And that's how it all kind of came together. And as we talked, it really dawned on me, and I knew this, but when you get that credit, you're getting people talking, saying good things about you and your work, and it's not really humbling. It's an affirmation that you're damn good at what you do, and you pay attention, and you know it.
It's an honor.
It's a big honor.
Humbling is when you have to go home and clean the toilet afterwards.
That's humbling.
That's humbling.
Yeah, that's no good.
But owning it when somebody is treating you with the respect and honor that you have earned as a result of putting that energy into those details, that's owning it. That's honoring it.
And you own that awesomeness that you give yourself a pat on the back. Mm-hmm. And not a lot of us are good enough about that. And I think that's such a difference between arrogance and owning it. Arrogance has nothing to do with the other, vice versa. And I think there's a very distinct difference.
I think sometimes it can be confused, especially when somebody who owns that doesn't necessarily in the same breath acknowledge what they're not good at, which I think is important as well. And you just started the whole story with that. Listening is a really good way to counter that concern about appearing arrogant, is to listen and to ask them questions. So I get that. It can be a fine line and it can be misunderstood. And part of me doesn't care if it's misunderstood, because the majority of the people that see what you bring to the table aren't going to misunderstand that honor versus arrogance.
They're not. And as people get to know you, and I can only speak from experience, is when you carry yourself well and when you talk highly about your friends and others, and when you really have honed your skills and you love to talk about it and you've got a passion. Passion is key. Expertise is one thing, but passion and loving it is another. And when you embrace that, I can sit shoulders back, chest out, head high, and really have this pride in everything I do and the stories that it tells and the people's lives that it touches. That to me is the most important part. And over the years, I found how fascinated people are to hear your story, because everybody has one. And when it's super cool, own it.
Right.
Because you created it. You don't have to be arrogant. But I have often heard from people, well, you seem kind of intimidating. And I thought, well, that's an interesting way to, interesting analysis. I don't know if I agree with that, but,
It's because of the passion. Not
I think
everybody
so.
has found that
Your passion.
yet.
And when you have it, you speak with vigor, you glow, and you eloquently talk about it. And that comes across sometimes as, whoa. Intense. Well, so be it.
Well, I think it's mostly because there are a lot of people out there that never explored to find their passion or had an opportunity and turned it down for something safer. And so to them, that is a little intimidating and incredible and weird. So I think that probably is where that intimidation factor comes from. It's people who wouldn't have done what you did because they were afraid of it.
And people that also don't know you well.
Right.
Because when you talk to people that know me well, for example, will tell you he's incredibly kind, has a big heart, incredibly thoughtful. That doesn't bode well with the narcissist or arrogant. It just doesn't, they don't jive.
Right.
And so, working for yourself can be significantly challenging with tremendous rewards and lots of sleepless nights. But I've discovered lately that, just by this kind of new thing, and I just, went today to photograph these boxes in their settings. Well, I'm working, right?
Right.
But now all of a sudden, I'm playing photographer, which I do not pretend to be one, but I have a really good eye. And so I can pick out the right rock, and I can, but now I'm outdoors. It's just like my childhood. I'm outdoors. I can hear the water. I can smell the lumber. I can hear the leaves. That's a pretty awesome feeling to have when you're doing your job.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that.
I had somebody, Corey Swanson, a while back when I told him I wanted to work for myself, that I wanted to, I can't remember how I put it. I said that I want to make a living doing what I love to do. And he said, Sarah, you're thinking too small. He said, making a living, you may as well just hire yourself and give yourself a job. He said, you want to earn income. It's not the same thing as making a living. And then when I think about you going out and as part of your work, going out to the Blackfoot River, the Yellowstone River, maybe cast a few times while you happen to be there, and then take some pictures because that's why you're there. I call that income producing activities. So when I work with my coaching clients and we talk about what their ultimate goals are, and my coaching is communication coaching, not life coaching. At the same time, it's really important for people to have a vision for what they want in their lives, because communication is going to be the key to getting there. So I tell them, think about what your potential income producing activities are. And you wouldn't say photographer as an income producing activity, but marketing and promotion, absolutely. That's part of your income producing activity.
It absolutely is. And I know that, yes, there'll be naysayers per se that will hint at, your time is better spent here. You shouldn't be out doing that. And I go, well, no, because now how can I really truly tell the story about this if I didn't do it?
Right.
That's what separates the wheat from the chaff, is that truly authentic element that, and it's not like I had to go to some horrible location.
Right.
I mean, it was really pretty nice. And when I hear the feedback from folks that are experiencing it just on a computer screen, that's affirmation enough to know that it makes sense for the business, but it feeds my soul.
Exactly.
And when it feeds my soul, that's what makes me want to come back and do it again and make more and get up and...
It's just another aspect of what makes your business successful. I know I've heard that before too, your opportunity cost for doing something like that. But the opportunity cost is actually losing your passion. That would be devastating.
It would be, it would be bad. And also cutting corners. Like, there's so many things in the woodworking world, and really any other world, even, cooking or you name it, where you could cheat a little bit. You can do it faster. You can cut a corner. And that comes back to that whole, what makes you tick? What makes you comfortable? Meaning me, the maker, the one that puts my name on it. I don't have a brand. I don't have a stamp. It's signed. That signature says I did my best. That I know how to do, and I really do know how to do it, and I'm going to take the extra time to do it right.
It's the details again. And it's living with yourself.
I have to do that.
Right, and it's creating an experience, and it all comes down to those details and not cutting corners. Mm-hmm. So just as a final story to add to this episode of the podcast, your stories don't define you, how you tell them will. You hinted at how this started with a goodwill gesture. So can you tell me that story?
Sure. So it's probably been, it's been a while, 10, 11 years maybe, I don't really know. But up until 5 years ago, there was no fishing gear at all. I make tables and chairs and beds and had a gallery in downtown Helena, and that's what I did.
And it's beautiful work.
Yeah, I loved it. And yet, I don't know. I just happened to be working one day, and I had a knock on the door. And this young man came in who was clearly a fishing guide. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know who he was, and it didn't matter. And he said that I was recommended, and he had an old net, a dip net. And he said I was recommended by a mutual friend to be the guy that could fix it. And here I am building like 10 dining room chairs, and so I could have been arrogant and said, sorry, it's not what I do. But he told me a story. That it was his grandfather's giving it to his dad had used it, and now he has it. It's got a legacy. So he told me this story, and I was compelled. How could I not fix it?
Right.
So I did, and he was just so excited because I really just kind of stopped everything and made it brand new again, basically. And off he went. And over time, I found out that young man, who, unbeknownst to me, his family owns the Orbis company. Oh. And so I thought, well...
That's kismet if I've ever heard of it.
Yeah, and I thought, wow, that's an interesting... I had no idea. Well, then I did, of course, and, he just happened to live here. And anyway, then time progresses. This young guy moves back to Vermont, and he's going to work for the company, and finds the woman of his dreams. They get married, and all the fly fishing guides here chipped together and had me make a coffee table for he and his new wife. So kind of got back in touch with him to talk about that, and now he's a big shot at the company. And we did that, and then like a year later, I'm thinking, I really need to create a product that's affordable, it's accessible, it's people come here for, I happen to be out front of my old studio in the Great Northern Town Center in the retail spot, and there was the hotel was right there, and all these drift boats would come in every morning. The guides are picking up these people, and I thought, man, what a market. But I'm going to be on the moon over here selling $1,000 tables and chairs and things like that they're not going to put in their suitcase. So it got me thinking, what is the perfect thing that somebody coming from wherever to Montana to fish might want to take home? How about a wooden fly box? So what do? Like everybody else, you Google it and see what's everybody else doing. Do they exist? And oh my gosh, there's a million of them out there. So how do you separate yourself? Well, easy. I owned it because I knew what I could do. I knew my abilities. If I can make a small box to the same standards as I can a chair that's in a museum, I don't see how you can go wrong. So made two. And was very excited, but I had no idea how to sell Who to sell them to? I could just put them on a shelf and let them wait, or I could be proactive. Well, I thought about this young man that I had met who works for one of the largest fly fishing companies there is, and thought, I'm just going to reach out. Why not? So I did, and long story short, he said, I'll have somebody get back to you if we're interested, and they absolutely did. And it was a game changer.
Mm-hmm.
And so that good deed thing is like, I don't even think I charged him for when I fixed the net, because he just didn't look like he had anything, like he was just a young fishing guide. And it really was not that big of a deal, but it actually really was on two levels. Mm-hmm. One, he got his net back, and two, when I reached out and said, hey, do you remember me? I've got these boxes. You're darn right I remember you. And I'm going to hook you up with the right people. And now the rest is history.
Everything.
Changes everything.
Did you ever read Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point?
Mm-hmm.
I just keep thinking about that, and I actually just was talking to somebody about that earlier today, that point where you've been building and building. When I talk about a pivot point, a story that changed your life, I don't think about it in terms of a light switch suddenly coming on and the room being bright. I think of it more as a dimmer switch. But then there is that last small step that does put it on full bright. And that's what I keep thinking about, that was kind of your tipping point, was that fixing that net just because you loved his story.
Yeah. That is, if he hadn't have told the story, I wouldn't have done it.
Oh, so for my listeners, just so you just hear that again, if he hadn't told Al the story, he wouldn't have fixed his net. It would have been just another net.
Just another net that he got.
And you didn't have time for that.
No.
So to my listeners, if you ever wondered the value of telling your story, an important story, something that is meaningful to the person in front of you, that alone was a tipping point for the start of something really important, a beautiful relationship between you and the company, but in particular this young man.
Yeah. So
telling your story matters, even if it's about an old fishing net that has been passed down along the generations. It totally
matters, and especially when it's an heirloom. Mm-hmm. And how ironic that that's what I create. Mm-hmm. I create the next heirlooms. And so it really struck me, and it really sat, and I can tell that story over and over and have. And in fact, they've even retold it in their catalogs because it's such a poignant and important piece.
It is.
And it connects people to the tangible.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Al, thank you for sharing some time with me and drinking a beer with me here in your shop.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah, very much.
I'm going to include some pictures from your shop that I took earlier and a picture of the fly box that I took. And I'll also include some links to some of your work and maybe some of the pictures you've taken that you share on Facebook. Mm-hmm. And for our listeners, remember that your stories, even about something as basic as a piece of your history, those stories matter to people, even to a total stranger, and it can be the difference between developing a deep relationship and not.
And when you do something cool, do it right, and then own it. Own those results, smile, and do it again, because people will love it.
Own it. Thanks, Al.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Share Them Will. Please visit my website for more podcast episodes, blog posts, and information about how I can help you develop and share your stories at elkinsconsulting.com.
How could you tell me that you're going away?